Greetings, everybody. Welcome to the African Village Woman Podcast. It's a pleasure to be here. Sonunkuduka, for meaning greetings and welcome to all of you. It's a pleasure to be here. For those of you who this is your first time being here, my name is Dr. Yokiam Dabale, and this podcast centers the African rural women or African village women. And the way I center village women is by telling stories, discussing research, and highlighting village lifestyle from an Afrocentric perspective. And I also make connections with diasporians, so Black diasporians around the world, and also very Pan-African, of course, with other African countries on the African continent. So again, it's a pleasure to be here. For today's episode, one of the things that I often do is to dedicate an episode to someone in my life or someone I admire, who I may not be related to. For today, I'm dedicating it to my African American mama. Her name is Bernadine. Bernadine grew up in such a traumatic environment, but yet she was kind enough. She adopted two children and she raised them as though they were her own until the day she died. She died in her early 80s. And she was a mother to me. She was inspiring to me because of her lifestyle and also the way she embraced me. She adopted me like her own daughter when I met her. So yes to Mama Bernadine. For today's episode, I would like to discuss about the lifestyle of rural women. Often when my students will ask me, what is Africa like? So for those of you who may not know, I'm not sure actually I mentioned this in this podcast. Beyond being a scholar, I also do grassroots organizing. I'm an everyday activist. What this means is that I when I see things that are wrong, especially racial related, I call it out and encourage solutions. Okay, and grassroots organizing. I've organized cooking events. I've organized clothing, events where I go and donated stuff, or I've had students live with me, etc., etc. I'll discuss more about this later on in this channel about the other things that I do. But nonetheless, so when doing one of my time when I still do it, I go to schools, people invite me to schools to speak to children about Africa. One of the things that children will often ask me is, or even college kids will ask me, what's Africa like, especially rural communities, because because I discuss, African rural women, or African village women. So this came from that inspired me. And also, actually, I mentioned Mama Bernadine, who I dedicate this episode to. When I first met her, even though she, older African American woman, she didn't know much about Africa. Part of it is because, remember, in one of my episodes, I talk about how Africa, even to Africans, right, rural communities as described or promoted or portrayed as backward, this place of evil, etc., etc. So even so, a similar way of indoctrination, African Americans have internalized those ideas as well because of slavery. You see, so a lot of African Americans don't know much about Africa unless they make the effort to to study the continent. Nonetheless, so even Mama Bernadine asked me about Africa. What's Africa like? And she heard all these horror stories, so she was surprised to see me as a young lady with head on my shoulders, with some level of pride on my blackness. Nonetheless, so this episode is inspired by that, both by my students and also by Mama Bernadine and many other people too, who over the years have asked me about my experience growing up in rural northern Nigeria and being an African woman. Okay. So the title that I titled this episode, "A Day in the Life of an African Village Woman." A day in the life of an African village woman. So I wanted to just share with you, based on actually my experience and also observation, okay, and my research. Because a couple of years ago, for my PhD dissertation, I interviewed women in my village, and in many ways, a lot of the things they're still doing, I knew this growing up. So in some ways, it validates the things that I already knew about my community. There are other communities too who have similarities in terms of how these rural women live their lives. Be it in Zimbabwe, which I actually have interest in Zimbabwe because of Zimbabwean history. So I've studied Zimbabwean women to some extent, especially when it comes to their spirituality. So rural women, in Africa, but a lot of this will come from my experience growing up in rural northern Nigeria, and also the experience of other women who have studied. Okay, so a day in the life of an African village woman. A day in the life of an African village woman. So you got the title. Now the question is, why is it even important, right? This question. When people would ask me that question, even when when I started public speaking as a young lady, so we're talking about decades, okay? And that question at first was sort of, I had to pause to reflect, because sometimes when you're living your life, you don't think much about it. But I had to pause and reflect. So over the years, I reflected on this question. I pondered on the question, as you say, as Oyubo would say. Okay, I pondered the question. A great book that put things in perspective for me, in addition to what I knew, was a book. The book title is Remotely Global. Global, and it's by Charles Piot. Okay, I'll put the book of, as usual now. I will put in the description box the title of the book, so you can go if you're interested in reading it. It's called Remotely Global. The point of that book is to say that rural people are often seen as the other, are often seen as the past. Remember in my last episode I discussed this. Are often seen as removed from reality, from everyday reality of urban people. Okay? But what this scholar is saying is that actually rural people are part of global. They too are global. And the other, so hence the importance of why, right, we should know about rural people and how, and also even the contribution of rural people. So this book put things in perspective, especially for folks maybe in the academic setting who may not say, oh, rural women, what are they bringing to the table? Or rural or village people, what are they bringing to the table? Or even Africans actually who disregard rural communities. So this is a great, text for that. And then also, I hope you take something from this episode as well. So Charles Piot, that's the title of the book is Remotely Global. Okay, why are rural people even important? Based on my research, also, sub-Saharan Africa, even though a lot of people are becoming, a lot of the countries are becoming urban, they're being urbanized, or right. A lot of people are going to the city trying to find better ways, better life, right? It's still very rural. So a majority of the population lives in rural communities. So it's very important for us to pay attention to what's happening in rural spaces. Okay. And I'm originally from Nigeria. For those of you who may not know this, in Nigeria, rural communities are often marginalized, are seen as that place that investment is not a priority. You see, at any rate, so right now I'm going to focus on, I'll attempt to capture in a few minutes what the life of rural women looks like, right? Or on day-to-day basis, but more so for a day, right? A day in the life of a rural woman, right? A day in the life a day in the life of an African village woman, okay? So first thing first, what she does when a woman wakes up in the morning, a village woman wakes up in the morning, the first thing she does is to shower. So after shower, right? Mind you, she gets up pretty early. What I mean by pretty early, I'm talking about 4 a.m. Okay? But then it depends also on age. So if you're an older woman later, we're talking about grannies and all, they wake up much later, maybe around 6 a.m. or so. But if you have children, you wake up early because you're trying to get them ready also for their day. So you wake up early, you shower, you sweep, okay? You organize the house, you cook breakfast, and then when it's a bit light, light, you're able to see, you go and fetch water, because you fetch water for the house, you bring it and pour it and pour it inside. You have a pot where you put the water in there to store the water. a clay pot, usually clay pot that that the community may community make. So you pour it, so you store water in there. Sometimes people have bigger, like drum. We call them drums. That's what they use sometimes, for fuel. But you buy new one, so you don't have oil in your water. And so you put water in there. So you fetch water. You wake up early in the morning, shower, make breakfast, fetch water. Now you get the kids ready, because if you have little children, you have to get them ready to go to school because there's school in the neighborhood. So they get to school. So we're talking about all of this has to be done before 8 a.m. So all the kids will get ready, go to school, eat their breakfast, go to school. Now, once the kids go to school, they're on their way to school, right? At 8 a.m., you're heading to farm, because most women are farmers in rural communities, and more so in my community. A lot of the women are farmers, even though they do side hustles. Some of the women would do side house hustle, maybe selling traditional juice, which is usually made with grain, okay, called guinea corn, or sorghum, or they make kose, which is just a little delicacy, or tofu cake, like usually bean cake. They will make that, etc., etc. So those are side hustles, but their main work is farming. So they'll go to farm at 8 a.m. Okay, when you go to farm at 8 a.m., you work all the way till till about 3 p.m. Right, 3 p.m. You come back, and it depends. If it's sunny, super sunny, then sometimes some women will work till noon, and then they'll come, because you don't get the heat, and the sun could be so much. So it depends on the weather for that day, but they will do their best and get the work that needed to be done on the farm, and then they come back home. When they come home, they rest briefly, and then now they're gonna start preparing to cook for the day, because food are made fresh every day. Okay, they made fresh, and because they're made fresh and organic, that means that the preparation is a lot. So it's not like here in the diaspora, where people have frozen food, or they'll prepare the food and then they preserve it in the fridge. We don't do a lot of preserving, especially for fresh. Let's say for meat. Meat will spoil within 24 hours. I know that. Even here in the US, I don't leave my meat outside for a few hours, because it will rot. Meat will rot. So if you're gonna have meat in your dish for that day, you don't want to leave it for a long time outside, because a lot of people don't have refrigerators. So nonetheless, so you make the food, but this is not to suggest we don't process food in the village. We have techniques of processing different kinds of food, which I will discuss about this actually later on in this episode, in this podcast. But for today, just know that when she comes back from the farm, around noon, or it depends if the sun is not as hot, she can take a little bit more time on the farm. Comes back home from the farm, and then she will rest a little bit, and then she will cook. Okay, she will cook and clean, have the kids who eat, and the family eat, husband eats, everyone eats. So we're talking about, and then of course you sweep the area, clean the house again, and wash the dishes. Now if you have kids that are a bit older, so we're talking about 11 years old kids, and so they've already been started the training, home training of helping mom. So they wash the dishes and all of that, so mom doesn't have to wash dishes. And then after that, so we're talking by 7 p.m., everybody's done, and you shower for the day. Of course, you shower again. So people shower twice. So there's nothing like, oh, I'm not showering today. No, a shower is very important to rural people, because you work a lot, and you also want to be fresh when you go to bed. So you shower again before you go to bed. So by 7 p.m., everybody is done for the day. So she started her work, an ordinary village woman, right? Who is not an old woman. Starts 4 a.m. to 7 p.m. Okay? And now if this woman have other engagements, in between this time, she might cut that. She might cut some time off from her farming work, so that she can go and attend to those things. Okay, before she comes home, coming home and prepare meal for the day is important. Okay, and also make sure the kids are fine. So everybody by 7 p.m., the kids are expected to have done their schoolwork. So when you finish your schoolwork, Sometimes, some parents, who have some means, they will let the kids maybe watch something on their phone. That is if they finish their homework. Now, but majority of the time, really, you before, so the entertainment for the night would be parents will hang out. So husband and wife, they will just hang out with each other outside in the family compound. They'll chit chat, enjoy each other's company. It's a thing that husbands and wives do regularly. So every day they will sit down and spend time with each other at night, and just talk about the day. I remember my parents, they used to do that, and it was always lovely. Sometimes, I'll be allowed to just sit and be quiet, of course, because, grown folks conversations. But if the conversation is deep, I'll be sent away to go maybe listen to story, talking about stories. The other thing we do for all the kids, if you have a lot of children and you have older children, the older children usually take the responsibility of telling stories. So I remember, in fact, what my sister, who I dedicated my episode to the last episode, she was sharing stories with me. So I remember at night, in the evening, we'd sit down in the family compound in one of the villages we lived in. She would tell me stories, and some of the stories are often quite scary. but the stories they always have at the end, the moral of the story is be a good person. The moral of the story is don't steal, etc. So the stories, they often have a message that you're expected, to learn, okay, or lesson you're expected to learn from the stories. So I learned about storytelling growing up that way too. Okay, sometimes elders, in the community, even though it's the evening before the kids go to bed, they'll call, and then they'll all sit down around the elder, and the elder would tell them stories that they're trying to pass. The elder might be telling stories about the importance of preserving our culture, or the importance of being a team player, etc., etc. Okay, so that's that. Now, I'll like to conclude actually with with challenges that rural communities face, especially in the community that I studied in northern Nigeria. So the first challenge, is lack of electricity. So we don't have electricity, even though some families, few families will have a generator, which is something that people in the city have. Actually, you have generator, but that's one of the major challenge. There's no electricity. The other one is running water. So remember, I said earlier, the rural women will wake up early, right, and go fetch water. Okay, so there's no plumbing, indoors plumbing. You don't have that. So running water, so you have to go fetch water, which takes time, from your day. Because if you have running water, then you don't have to go and fetch it. And the other is, so because you don't have running water, also washing your clothes, this is something you're gonna have to go fetch plenty of water so you can, wash your clothes. So, and then poor road. So our roads, or roads, very poor. They have not been cared for, and which is the responsibility really of the state, of the local government, to address it, because they receive funds from the state government to take care of this problem, but you often do not see that. So that's why, unfortunately, when you see stories about rural communities in Africa, you see, oh my God, there's no road. They're so poor. It's as though there is no fund to take care of it. There are funds that the government will give to the councillors, who are the representatives of the community. The local politicians. They will give them funds for this, and then they don't take care of it. This brings me to misappropriation of funds. So you have government officials who unfortunately, many times, they're from that community. They give them a lot of money to take care of the needs of the community, and they're often not cared for. So, and then at the same time, they expect some foreigner, some white person, or you both, to come and fix the roads, when you have money. Really, you have been allocated funds to take care of the needs of the people. See that the priorities are not very clear, unfortunately, for many of these communities, especially the people who are representing the communities. And then the other one is a hospital. So the community that I studied, there's only one clinic that was built many years ago, and that clinic serves thousands of people. Can you imagine a clinic? It's not a hospital. Even though in Hausa they will say abinang asibiti. Asibiti means hospital. But really, when they say asibiti, it's really just a clinic where they don't have they don't have all the equipment needed. So sometimes they even run after they don't have running water in that clinic. They don't have a place to dispose the medical to use what they've used for on the patients. So they have to find a place to burn it, etc., etc. So there's that lack of proper medical facility, and then lastly, I would say it's in lack of even community center. You see, so those are some of the challenges. And then in terms of and the other part of it is also there's no university nearby. So education, in terms of education, although boys and girls are encouraged to go to school in the communities that I study, a lot of young people, they will just finish secondary school, primary school, so elementary to high school. Okay, and then after that they don't. After that they many times they stop going to school because there's no money for them to advance their education. And for those who are able to even go to college, many times they come back to the village because the city is unable to provide them with job opportunities, so they end up being farmers, and the cycle continues. Okay, so those are some of the challenges. Thank you so much for your time. Please share this podcast with many people so that YouTube can push this channel to the masses, and that way we can gain more views and subscribers. So subscribe, share, and again, thank you for being here. Now go to the thank you that you are here today, and please leave your comments also in the comment section. I'm happy to read it. So until then, say Anjuma. Okay? In other words, take care of yourself. Later.